because we can see the trouble they've been having dealing with Ukraine, armed with some NATO weapons. Imagine the mess that NATO would make of their army.
Yeah.
Olaf Scholz's coalition partners. And it's interesting, you mentioned Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock from the Green Party, who made this statement last night. That actually still stands in contrast to the silence from the Scholz Chancellery, which, as you say, hasn't given the official permission. There's been so many reasons given this year, so many of which have melted into excuses for the foot dragging that has been led by the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, on this. But two reasons really do stand out. There's one that's often brought up, which is to do with nuclear fear of nuclear escalation. But a lot of other people say that actually this is Germany falling into the trap and Scholz falling into the trap of Russia's nuclear blackmail, and point to how other countries actually managed to handle their nuclear fear much better, Poland being just one example. The other reason, which I think is really underlying this, the one I find more compelling, is that actually the Scholz Chancellery doesn't really want Ukraine to win. They don't want Ukraine to lose, but they don't want Russia to either win or lose either. And so they're looking for more of a stalemate situation and a divided Ukraine, almost a Minsk III agreement without the name. And that's totally unacceptable to Ukrainians. It's totally unacceptable to Germany's allies. So there's a big question as to why they're actually doing that.
Blimey. So Germany wants a different outcome to the common outcome that we just assume many of our European allies would want, which is for Russia to be thrown out of the country, for Ukraine to be an independent, free country once again.
Yes, it's not Germany, the Scholz Chancellery in particular.
Right.
So Olaf Scholz and the key advisors around him and the faction of his party that is driving this policy. That's certainly not what the Green Party or the Liberal Free Democrat Party, his other two coalition partners, want. And it's not what the policy of the main opposition party, the Conservative Christian Democratic Union, want. It's also not what most of Germany's people want. And it's definitely not what Germany's allies want. So the question is, why is Scholz pursuing this? I think that the Chancellery has realized that this is what we would call a system transforming war. If one side wins and the other loses, it's going to unleash a big change in the international system. And that's something that Scholz is not willing to accept and doesn't want to accept, because I think they realize that they're not equipped, nor are they willing to deliver the kind of change that Germany would actually need to meet that emerging world. And that's a world that's being grasped with enthusiasm by NATO allies such as Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, the Czech Republic, and soon to be NATO members like Finland, who've really led the way, these countries, in providing heavy weapons, but also really saying this is about standing up for democracy against autocracy. That's not the world that Scholz is looking for.
Scholz has sort of hidden behind the cloak of NATO a little bit. He did mention in Davos last week that he was worried about a war escalating between Russia and NATO, he said, rather than specific nations like his own. Can anyone apply pressure on Olaf Scholz? How pleased would NATO be to be sort of dragged into this argument or this predicament?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, that excuse has been rolled out repeatedly in Germany. It's interesting, it made the international press this time, but it's something that people from Scholz's party have been saying for a long time. And for some reason, they seem to think that supplying main battle tanks might be the escalation to trigger that. Quite how that differs from supplying infantry fighting vehicles, from supplying incredibly powerful multiple launch rocket systems or self-propelled guns is unclear to anyone. How it's different from supplying the flak panzers, the Gepards that the Germans supplied earlier in the war, also remains something of a mystery. But it's interesting that other NATO allies, again, don't fear this. And the way that weapons are being handled, the way that deliveries are being made, it's careful that NATO people are involved up until the Ukrainian border to make sure that any attack that happened would probably involve NATO troops in a classic mode of what we call tripwire deterrence. So the damage that would be caused to any NATO troops there would likely draw NATO into a conflict, which is really what Russia doesn't want, because we can see the trouble they've been having dealing with Ukraine, armed with some NATO weapons. Imagine the mess that NATO would make of their army.
Yeah.